Hey there, and welcome back to Historical Narratives. I'm so glad you found your way to this quiet corner of the internet tonight, because we're about to travel far, far back in time, to a land so old that even the people who lived there once looked back on it with a sense of wonder and distance. A realm of towering gods and pharaohs who walked as living deities, of buried cities and sacred writings, where sunlight itself was thought to breathe life into the world, where the dead were believed to walk among the stars, and where every grain of desert sand seemed to hold a story of its own. Wherever you're listening from right now, let this be the moment you allow yourself to unwind. Let your thoughts loosen. Let the weight of the day slip away. And let your mind settle slowly into the hush of the ancient past. Tonight, we'll drift through legend and mummy-wrapped mystery, past hidden burial chambers and towering stone needles reaching for the sky. We'll cross paths with a crocodile-headed god, queens who rewrote the rules of power, and builders who achieved what should have been impossible. Some of what you hear may catch you off guard. Other pieces might simply float by like the edges of a dream. If this sort of calm, curious wandering is something you enjoy, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more sleepy wanderers find their way here. But for now, settle in, take a slow breath, and let's begin our drift into ancient Egypt. Egypt endured for so long that its own people eventually looked back on their earliest ancestors as impossibly distant. Here's a strange thought. Cleopatra actually lived nearer to our present day than she did to the age of the great pyramids builders. She reigned in the 1st century BCE, right at the tail end of Egyptian civilization. And by that point, the pyramids had already stood for more than 2,000 years. All told, Egyptian civilization stretched across roughly 3 millennia. A longer run than most of what we call recorded history, since hundreds of pharaohs came and went. Dynasties rose, fractured, and rose again. Yet, the same river kept flowing past every one of them, and the same constellations kept wheeling overhead. Time in Egypt wasn't something that simply ticked forward, it accumulated. The way silt piles up along a riverbed. So when we picture ancient Egypt, we're not looking at a single snapshot. We're peering into an extraordinarily long-running story of continuity, one that still isn't fully unraveled. Nile wasn't just a river, it was a timekeeper. Every year, without fail, the waters would rise. Late summer brought floods fed by rains falling far to the south, and those floodwaters spilled across the banks, transforming parched land into rich, plantable soil. The Egyptians didn't view this flooding as some natural hazard. They saw it as a divine gift, the very exhale of the earth. Their whole calendar was built around it. The new year didn't start in the cold of winter. It began with the river's rise. The star Sirius, blazing back into the night sky after months of absence, served as their early warning system. Nearly everything, planting, harvest, construction, worship, moved to the Nile's rhythm. Even their myths mirrored its cycle: death, burial, and rebirth. The river shaped not just their fields, but their entire way of thinking about time, eternity, and the delicate boundary separating life from death. Pharaohs were considered gods, yet even they had to prove themselves worthy of the afterlife. Ruling Egypt meant occupying the space between the human and the divine. A pharaoh wasn't simply a monarch. He was believed to be the living embodiment of Horus. Carvings and statues showed him bearing sacred emblems: the crook, the flail, the cobra crown, the ceremonial beard. His decree carried the weight of law, and his image was treated as holy. And yet, even a god-king faced judgment. After death, his heart would be placed on a scale, weighed against a feather of truth, exactly like any farmer, servant, or laborer. If the heart proved too heavy with cruelty and deceit, a waiting creature would devour it, erasing the soul entirely. Earthly power bought no exemptions. A pharaoh still had to live with integrity, honor the gods, and walk a righteous path, because in Egypt, even divinity answered to a final reckoning. For nearly 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid held the title of the tallest structure ever built by human hands. Rising from the sands at Giza, the Great Pyramid of Khufu once gleamed under the desert sun, sheathed in polished white limestone that shimmered like a jewel. Standing close to 500 feet tall, it kept its record from around 2560 BCE all the way until medieval European spires finally surpassed it. No cranes, no iron tools, no advanced machinery, just enormous crews of workers, meticulous planning, and sheer determination. Even now, the exact building methods are, and completely understood. Its corners line up almost perfectly with true north, south, east, and west, and its base is level to within a hair's breadth. Standing near it, you can feel something almost otherworldly, not just its scale, but the sense of purpose baked into every stone. It wasn't only a tomb. It was a statement addressed to time itself. The Great Sphinx may be even older than the pyramids beside it, and we still aren't certain whose face it wears. Gazing eastward, carved from a single colossal block of stone, the Sphinx pairs a lion's body with a human face shrouded in mystery. For centuries, it sat buried in sand up to its neck. Some researchers suspect it predates the pyramids entirely, possibly commissioned by an earlier ruler, or perhaps by a civilization history has forgotten. Others point to its oddly small head relative to its body and wonder if it was recarved at some point. Its original face lost to time. Was it modeled on Khafre? On some other king entirely? We may never know for certain. Centuries of wind and shifting sand have worn away its features, yet its expression remains steady, watchful, unreadable. The Sphinx doesn't offer answers. It simply waits and endures. Hieroglyphs weren't treated as mere writing. They were thought to possess a kind of life of their own. In ancient Egypt, putting words into symbols wasn't a neutral act. It was considered sacred, a way of channeling energy into thought itself. Each glyph, whether shaped like a bird, an eye, or a coiled rope, carried more than sound and meaning. It carried a kind of latent power. Certain symbols were considered so potent that scribes hesitated to carve them in full, worried the image might somehow awaken. Depictions of snakes or dangerous creatures were sometimes drawn incomplete or broken on purpose, just to keep whatever power they held dormant. Priests would recite incantations meant to activate carved inscriptions, trusting that the words could reach beyond the stone and act in the world. Tombs weren't decorated purely for aesthetics. Their inscriptions were meant to actually function, supplying the dead with nourishment, protection, and remembrance. In Egypt, writing doubled as magic, and reading those old symbols today still feels like listening for voices that once believed they could reach across eternity. Becoming a mummy was neither quick nor pleasant. It was an elaborate, deeply sacred process. Turning a body into a mummy took around 70 days, filled with incantations, oils, spices, and long stretches of ritual silence. It began with purification, washing the body in consecrated water. Next came the removal of internal organs, the stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines, each sealed away in its own protective jar. The brain was extracted through the nostrils and simply discarded, considered unimportant. The heart, believed to house the soul, was either left in place or carefully preserved for its later weighing in the afterlife. The body was packed in natron, a mineral salt that pulled out every trace of moisture. After weeks of drying, it was wrapped, layer after layer, in fine linen, with protective charms tucked between the folds. Every action followed a script, every gesture carried meaning. Death wasn't viewed as an ending, it was a transformation, and mummification was the sacred craft that made someone eternal. Egyptian physicians could set broken bones, close wounds, and even address emotional distress. Egyptian medicine wasn't purely mystical. It was, in many ways, remarkably sophisticated. Surviving medical papyri detail how to splint fractures, clean and suture injuries, and check a patient's pulse to diagnose illness. Honey was used as a natural antiseptic, and willow bark, which contains the same active compound found in modern aspirin, helped relieve pain. There were remedies documented for everything from toothaches to stomach troubles to nightmares. Even psychological suffering had its treatments. Ancient texts describe incantations and herbal blends meant to ease sorrow, restlessness, and despair. The boundary between physician and priest was thin, but both shared the belief that healing came from restoring balance among body, spirit, and the unseen forces shaping the world. In a civilization ruled by gods, medicine functioned as both science and sacred practice. Harming a cat, even by accident, could cost you your life. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't simply household pets. They were regarded as protectors, symbols of elegance, and living connections to the divine. The goddess Bastet, depicted with a feline face and a lioness's fierce heritage, was worshipped as a guardian of homes and mothers. Cats were cherished, spoiled, and legally shielded, so much so that killing one, even unintentionally, counted as a capital offense. Greek travelers described crowds erupting in fury over the death of a single cat. Families mummified their feline companions, buried them in miniature coffins, and even shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning. Some temples housed dozens of sacred cats, fed with offerings and prayers, valued for hunting snakes, watching over children, and resting near the dead. To live in ancient Egypt was to share your world with creatures considered both ordinary and divine. Temples weren't built for people. They were built as literal residences for the gods. Step inside an ancient Egyptian temple, and you weren't entering anything like a modern place of worship. You were crossing into a space designed for the divine. Every hall, courtyard, and corridor followed a deliberate layout, drawing visitors ever deeper toward the innermost, most sacred chamber. Hidden there sat the god statue, which priests bathed, dressed, anointed, and fed each day. Offerings were laid before it. Incense burned to summon its presence. Ordinary Egyptians rarely glimpsed the statue itself, and only during festivals were the outer courtyards even open to them. The temple as a whole was conceived as a small model of the cosmos, its walls representing the boundaries of creation, its ceiling the star-filled night sky. Walking its halls meant walking through a physical model of creation itself. In Egypt, the gods weren't distant abstractions. They had homes, and many of those homes are still standing. The journey into the afterlife was long, dangerous, and filled with trials before any final reward. Death in Egypt wasn't an ending. It was the start of a perilous voyage. The soul had to pass through caverns, gates, deserts, and rivers, facing demons and watchful gods along the way. It needed to recite secret passwords, outwit serpents, and answer riddles correctly. At every stage, spells drawn from the Book of the Dead offered guidance, functioning almost like a map through the unknown. Eventually, the soul reached the Hall of Two Truths, where its heart was weighed against a single feather. A heart light and pure earned passage into eternal paradise. A heart burdened by wrongdoing was devoured by Ammit, a creature blending lion, crocodile, and hippopotamus. There were no second chances. That outcome was final and absolute. Because of this, the dead were buried with everything they might need: food, tools, prayers, even songs, to help them survive that hidden realm. In Egypt, death wasn't something to dread outright, but it absolutely demanded preparation. The gods wore animal heads to expose the hidden forces at work behind the visible world. Egyptian deities weren't confined to purely human shapes. They bore the heads of falcons, cats, crocodiles, and jackals, each form layered with symbolic meaning. Horus carried a falcon's head, representing the sky and the piercing gaze of kingship. Anubis wore the head of a jackal, fitting for a guardian who watched over cemeteries where real jackals prowled. Sobek took on the crocodile's form, fierce and protective, rising from the depths of the Nile. These weren't costumes. They were understood as truths. The animal imagery illustrated how each god moved through the natural world, not as rulers set apart from it, but as forces woven directly into it. Seeing a hawk circle overhead or a cat curl into a doorway meant catching a glimpse of something sacred hiding in plain sight. Despite its name, the Book of the Dead wasn't really a single book, and it was never intended for the living to read casually. It was actually a shifting collection of spells, hymns, and instructions, customized for each individual, and either written on papyrus or painted directly onto tomb walls. It wasn't bedtime reading. It was a survival guide for the soul, meant to help navigate the underworld after death. The deceased needed to speak sacred phrases, know hidden names, and perform specific ritual actions, and the text laid out exactly how. Some copies contained only a handful of spells, others stretched on for many meters of papyrus. No two versions matched exactly. The living prepared this guide, tucked it beside the body, and never needed to open it again. A silent map meant for a journey none of them could witness firsthand. Some tombs were stocked with board games meant for use in the afterlife. Alongside gold statues, food offerings, and protective charms, archaeologists frequently uncover something far more ordinary: board games. The most famous is Senet, played on a wooden grid that mapped out fate and forward movement. It might look like simple entertainment to us, but to the Egyptians, it mirrored the soul's own journey, tokens advancing past hazards, landing on safe squares, eventually reaching a final resting place. Kings played it during life and expected to play it again in eternity. Some boards were crafted from ivory, others were etched into stone, complete with painted instructions nearby on tomb walls. In a world full of unseen dangers, even the gods were imagined enjoying games, and the dead were sent off with playing pieces in hand, ready for one more match beneath the stars. The Egyptians believed the brain was useless, while the heart held the soul. Today, we think of the brain as the seat of thought and identity, but ancient Egyptians treated it as little more than packing material, removed and discarded without ceremony during mummification. The heart, not the brain, was thought to hold memory, morality, emotion, and truth. It was the organ weighed during judgment, the one kept inside the body, the one believed to speak on the deceased's behalf before the gods. Even protective amulets were shaped like tiny hearts, placed near the real one for safekeeping. Without a heart, rebirth simply wasn't possible. And if that heart proved corrupt, there would be no return at all. To the Egyptians, wisdom didn't originate in the skull. It came from the chest, from a heart they believed never lied. Papyrus scrolls were durable enough that some have survived for roughly 3,000 years. Long before parchment or paper existed elsewhere, Egypt gave the world papyrus, crafted from tall reeds growing along the Nile. Sheets were pressed, dried, and joined into scrolls that were light, flexible, and remarkably resilient. These scrolls preserved hymns, tax records, love poetry, medical knowledge, and myth. Some were sealed away in tombs. Others were simply abandoned in desert ruins. And remarkably, many survive to this day. Despite floods, insects, and fire, plenty of these fragile pages remain readable, some even bearing the actual fingerprints of the scribes who made them. In every careful brushstroke, you can sense a human hand, long gone, still faintly speaking. Egyptian gods could die, transform, and even be born from their own tears. These deities weren't fixed or static beings. They were fluid, shifting, alive with possibility. A god could appear as a lion one day and a man the next, a breeze by morning. Some died only to be reborn. Others gave birth to themselves or wept so deeply that entirely new gods sprang from their tears. Osiris was dismembered and later resurrected. Atum was said to have created the world by spitting light into the void. Sekhmet, goddess of war, nearly wiped out humanity in a rage before being tricked into drinking red-dyed beer, transforming into gentle Hathor, goddess of joy. The lines separating destruction from healing, wrath from love, stayed thin and constantly shifting. In Egypt, the gods reflected the desert and the river both, harsh, life-giving, forever changing. The Ankh was never just a symbol. It functioned as a key to eternal life. It's one of the most recognizable images from ancient Egypt, a looped cross carried by gods, painted on tomb walls, worn as jewelry. But it wasn't merely decorative. The Ankh represented life itself, not just breath in this world, but existence stretching into eternity. It was offered to the dead, to pharaohs, to the soul at large. Gods were often depicted holding it near a person's nose, as if breathing life directly into them. It shows up on amulets, coffins, and temple architecture throughout Egyptian history. Some interpreted it as a stylized sunrise. Others saw a divine knot. Whatever its exact origin, everyone agreed it promised something. That life didn't simply stop. That something golden and glowing continued just beyond this world. Women in ancient Egypt could legally own property, run businesses, and on rare occasions, rule as pharaoh in their own right. In plenty of ancient cultures, women lived largely in the background, but Egyptian women held real legal standing. A woman could own land, inherit wealth, bring lawsuits, and manage her own business. She could sign contracts independently and leave her property to whomever she chose. Tomb art and official records show women serving as priestesses, musicians, scribes, and physicians. And at the very top of the social order, rarely, but unmistakably, a handful ruled as pharaohs, not merely as consorts standing behind a throne, but as sovereigns wielding power directly. Their names, though few, still echo through history. Hatshepsut, Sobkneferu, and others. Power wasn't distributed equally. But in Egypt, a woman could be far more than a wife or daughter. She could be a ruling voice, carved permanently into stone. Pharaohs wore ceremonial false beards, and this applied to female rulers too. The beard in ancient Egypt had nothing to do with masculinity. It symbolized divinity. Both male and female pharaohs wore stylized false beards, braided, upturned at the tip, often crafted from gold. These beards linked the wearer to Osiris, god of the afterlife, who was consistently depicted with facial hair. Even Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule as pharaoh, appeared in statues wearing that same ceremonial chin piece alongside the traditional kilt. and crown. It wasn't a disguise, it was sacred regalia. By wearing it, a ruler transcended ordinary humanity, becoming a bridge linking earth and sky, a god walking among mortals. In a culture where appearance itself carried ritual weight, even a beard functioned as a kind of spell. One of Egypt's most powerful rulers was a woman whose name was nearly wiped from history. Hatshepsut governed Egypt for more than 2 decades, presiding over an era of peace, prosperity, and ambitious construction. She organized trade expeditions, restored aging temples, and commissioned some of the most graceful architecture in the ancient world, including her striking cliffside temple at Deir el-Bahari. Yet, after her death, someone made a concerted effort to erase her. Her statues were smashed. Her name was chiseled off monuments. Officially, her memory was meant to disappear entirely. For centuries, she faded into obscurity, until modern archaeologists slowly reconstructed her story. Her likeness re-emerged from broken stone. Her accomplishments, once buried, rose again like columns from beneath the sand. She ruled as a king in every sense, but title and history ultimately failed to silence her. Cleopatra ruled Egypt, yet by blood she was Greek, and by circumstance ultimately bound to Rome. When Cleopatra VII took the throne, she inherited far more than royal authority. She inherited a fractured, weakening empire. Though she governed Egypt, her family descended from Macedonian Greek stock, tracing back to Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Remarkably, she was the first in her line to actually learn Egyptian. Fluent in multiple languages, she earned a reputation for intelligence, charisma, and sharp political instincts. She built alliances and relationships with both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. When it all eventually unraveled, she chose to end her own life rather than be paraded through Rome as a trophy of conquest. Egypt fell under Roman control shortly after her death. She was the final pharaoh, and in many ways, she never fully belonged to a single culture. She existed in the space between them. Wigs weren't primarily a fashion statement. They served as protection against lice, heat, and social judgment. Given the harsh Egyptian climate, many people shaved their heads entirely for practicality and cleanliness. But going out bald risked the appearance of poverty, so wigs offered a way to stay both hygienic and socially respectable. Many were elaborately styled, curled, beaded, perfumed with fragrant oils. Some were woven from human hair, others from plant fibers, and even children wore them for special ceremonies. For the upper classes, appearing in public without one was practically unthinkable. In burial, wigs were carefully placed beside the dead so they could remain dignified into eternity. In Egypt, hair functioned as identity, and a wig became a crown you could remove at will. Beer was often considered safer to drink than plain water, and even children drank it regularly. The Nile brought life, but its water carried its own risks. So Egyptians relied on beer brewed from barley and baked bread as an everyday staple rather than an occasional indulgence. It was thick, mildly sour, and low in alcohol. Laborers were sometimes paid in it. Priests offered it to the gods. Children drank it alongside meals. It functioned simultaneously as food, medicine, and ritual object. Some tomb paintings even depict beer brewing scenes, watched over by protective spirits, and festivals featured enormous vats prepared for communal celebration. Drinking beer meant participating in the rhythm of everyday life. Brewing it meant imitating the gods themselves. The poor wore sandals woven from palm fiber. The wealthy sometimes wore sandals made of gold, destined for the grave. In daily life, most Egyptians simply went barefoot. When sandals were worn, the materials revealed social standing instantly. Poorer citizens wore lightweight, easily replaced sandals made from woven palm fiber. Wealthier Egyptians often chose leather, but the truly elite, especially royalty, commissioned sandals crafted from solid gold, not meant for actual walking, but for burial. Discovered in tombs alongside linen wrappings and perfume jars, these golden sandals were meant to escort the dead into eternity with proper style and status. Some soles were even engraved with images of enemies, so the wearer could symbolically trample them forever. In life and in death, footwear communicated exactly who you were and where you hoped to end up. The people who built the pyramids weren't enslaved laborers. They were skilled workers who lived reasonably comfortable lives. The old image of chained slaves suffering under the whip has steadily crumbled under closer archaeological scrutiny. Evidence instead points to paid laborers, craftsmen, stonecutters, and planners, many housed in purpose-built worker villages nearby. They ate reasonably well bread, beer, beef, fish, and received medical care, and their own tombs reflect real pride in their work. Some were even buried with honor close to the pyramids they helped raise. Building these monuments functioned as a kind of national project, blending engineering with devotion. These weren't the nameless, suffering masses of popular myth. They were people with real skills, families, and stories still etched into the limestone they shaped. The Egyptian calendar counted 365 days, but the final 5 were considered outside normal time and somewhat unlucky. The Egyptians tracked the sun closely. Their year consisted of 12 months of 30 days each, leaving 5 extra days at year's end. These weren't treated as ordinary leftover time. They were viewed as strange and set apart, known as the epigonal days. Myth held that several gods, Osiris, Isis, the elder Horus, Set, and Nephthys, were born during this window. These days carried both sacred significance and a hint of danger. Festivals occurred, but so did protective rituals. Some people considered the period unlucky and simply stayed indoors. In that quiet pause between one year and the next, Egypt waited not out of fear, but with a kind of reverence for time that belonged to no ordinary category. The Nile flows in an unusual direction compared to most major rivers, and that shaped the Egyptians' entire sense of geography. It runs from south to north, which became something like a natural compass for the culture. Upper Egypt sat to the south, near the river's origin. Lower Egypt lay to the north, close to the Mediterranean. Everything moved according to the Nile's logic. Boats drifted downstream with the current and used sails to travel upstream against the wind. Even their maps followed this orientation. Life followed water, and thought followed life. The Nile became the backbone of the kingdom, a lifeline connecting the gods, even a kind of mirror to the Milky Way overhead. It didn't just irrigate fields, it reshaped how Egyptians understood space, direction, and destiny itself. Some temples were precisely aligned with celestial events, so that sunlight would strike their innermost chambers on exactly one sacred day each year. Egyptian temples weren't just constructed, they were calibrated to the heavens. Certain temples were built so that on one specific date annually, often tied to the birthday of the honored deity, the rising sun would travel straight through the temple's halls and illuminate the hidden sanctuary deep within. This wasn't accidental. It was cosmic engineering. At Abu Simbel, sunlight reaches the interior statues only twice a year, on dates connected to Ramesses II's birth and coronation. For a few brief minutes, stone seemed to come alive with light, shadow transformed into ritual theater. And then, just as precisely, the moment faded back into dusk. Ancient Egyptian eye makeup did more than enhance appearance. It offered real protection and invoked divine favor. Egyptians lined their eyes with kohl, a thick black pigment ground from crushed minerals. To modern eyes, it might look purely cosmetic, but for them, it served practical and spiritual purposes at once. Kohl cut down on sun glare and helped repel flies. It also contained lead-based compounds that surprisingly seemed to boost resistance to certain eye infections. Beyond the physical benefits, applying it was treated as a sacred act. The style mimicked the eyes of Horus and Ra, gods associated with vision and cosmic order. Putting it on functioned as ritual, shield, and quiet prayer, written in shadow across the skin. Scarab amulets weren't simply decorative. They were treated almost like tools for resurrection. To the Egyptians, the humble scarab beetle symbolized rebirth, transformation, and the rising sun. Each morning, they believed, the god Khepri, shown as a dung beetle, rolled the sun across the sky, just as the insect rolled its ball of dung across the ground. Scarab amulets offered protection during life and were tucked into mummy wrappings for the journey into death. Some bore inscriptions or names. Others were placed directly over the heart, sealed with spells meant to keep it from testifying against its owner during final judgment. These were more than trinkets. They functioned as small sacred devices meant to help carry the soul through death and back into light. Crocodiles inspired such reverence that some were mummified using gold. Most Egyptians regarded the crocodile with genuine terror, powerful, silent, and lethal. Yet it was also considered divine. The crocodile-headed god Sobek embodied both the raw power of the Nile and the untamed force of creation itself. Temples were dedicated to him, and priests kept living crocodiles in sacred pools, feeding them carefully and adorning them with jewelry. When these animals died, they were mourned, wrapped in linen, and sometimes mummified with gilded snouts and elaborate coffins. What much of the world feared, Egypt chose to worship, and in those quiet temple pools, the boundary between animal and God shimmered. Most Egyptians lived on the narrow strip, O.F. land between river and desert, and their homes have almost entirely vanished. When people picture Egypt, they typically imagine grand temples and pyramids, but those were exceptional structures, not typical dwellings. The overwhelming majority of Egyptians lived in simple mud brick homes built close to the Nile, where irrigation made farming possible. These bricks were dried in the sun rather than fired, meaning they crumbled fairly easily over time. Floods, wind, and centuries of reuse erased entire villages from the landscape. So while temples and tombs endure in solid stone, the ordinary homes, markets, and everyday laughter have largely disappeared. Egypt's ruins are quiet not because the land was empty, but because most of what people actually lived in was too humble to survive the centuries. Temple priests shaved their entire bodies to remain ritually pure, even their eyebrows. Cleanliness for Egyptian priests wasn't simply about hygiene. It carried sacred significance. Temple priests bathed multiple times daily, wore fine white linen, and avoided certain foods to maintain purity. One especially striking practice was full-body shaving, not just the head, but every trace of body hair, including eyelashes and eyebrows. This wasn't vanity. It was a kind of ritual reset, stripping away anything associated with the chaotic, animal, or worldly. In their smoothness and silence, priests became something like empty vessels, prepared to commune with the gods, tend sacred flames, and handle the statues housed deep within stone temple walls. The ibis, sacred to the god Thoth, was sometimes buried by the thousands in mass catacombs. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and the moon, was typically depicted with the head of an ibis, a slender bird with a distinctive curved beak. These birds held sacred status, and temples across Egypt kept large numbers of them. Upon death, the birds were mummified and carefully placed in dedicated burial chambers. Certain catacombs hold thousands of ibis mummies, stacked in niches, almost like scrolls filling a library. Pilgrims made these offerings, hoping for divine favor, safe travel, healing, a good harvest. Even the birds became part of that prayer, their wings folded gently and laid to rest beneath the earth. Egypt measured time using instruments powered by sunlight and water, well before mechanical clocks existed anywhere. Long before gears and pendulums, Egyptians tracked time with light and water. Sundials began simply, a stick planted in the ground, its shadow marking the passing hours, rather than vague general periods of day. Water clocks offered more precision, carefully shaped vessels that filled or drained at a steady, measured rate, marked with lines indicating elapsed time. These tools helped priests know exactly when to perform rituals, open temple doors, or anticipate a star's rising. Time in Egypt wasn't an abstract concept. It flowed visibly, like the Nile itself, and the instruments built to measure it reflected quiet genius. Egypt's capital shifted location repeatedly, often tracking shifts in power, politics, or prophecy. Unlike modern nations with a single fixed capital, ancient Egypt's center of power moved according to dynasty and belief. Memphis, near the Nile Delta, served as one of the earliest capitals, home to Egypt's first great kings. Thebes, farther south, rose to prominence during periods of religious revival and military strength. Later came Akhetaten, a city built essentially from scratch by a single pharaoh in devotion to a single god, then abandoned almost as quickly as it was raised. Even Alexandria, during Egypt's final chapter, functioned as a glittering capital under Greek rule. Each shift left behind its own monuments, memories, and mysteries. Each new center a statement about who held power and which gods mattered most. One pharaoh attempted to erase every other god and nearly upended Egypt's entire religious system. His name was Akhenaten, and his reign was unlike any before it. He dismantled the powerful priesthoods, shut down the traditional temples, and proclaimed a single true god, the Aten, represented by the sun disk. He relocated the capital to a brand new city, Akhetaten, and covered its walls with images celebrating sunlight, family, and personal devotion. The old gods Amun, Osiris, Thoth, Hathor were sidelined or defaced outright. For nearly 2 decades, Egypt functioned as a monotheistic kingdom. But after Akhenaten's death, everything reversed. The old gods returned, his name was chiseled from monuments, and his city crumbled into ruin. What survives is a haunting glimpse of a moment when core belief cracked and was later carefully mended. His son, Tutankhamun, became famous largely because his tomb survived intact. Tutankhamun ruled for less than a decade and died before reaching adulthood. His reign might have faded into obscurity, overshadowed by more legendary pharaohs, if not for one crucial detail. His tomb, B, was never looted. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered a sealed burial chamber in the Valley of the Kings, filled with golden shrines, alabaster vessels, chariots, statues, and a stunningly crafted funerary mask. For the first time, the modern world witnessed a royal burial exactly as it had been left, untouched, unspoiled, glittering with ancient intention. Tutankhamun became a symbol not of dominance, but of preservation. A quiet king remembered chiefly for what he left behind. Once pyramids became too easy a target for grave robbers, later pharaohs began hiding their tombs in cliffs instead. For generations, pharaohs built towering, unmistakable pyramids, and over time, nearly every one was broken into and looted. So later dynasties changed strategy entirely, burying their dead deep rather than building upward. The Valley of the Kings became a hidden royal cemetery, a series of tombs carved directly into desert cliffs. From the surface, they're nearly invisible inside. They're vividly decorated with stars, spells, and golden treasures. This shift marked more than an architectural change. It reflected a deepening secrecy, a quiet turn inward. Egypt's rulers were still reaching for eternity, just now doing so beneath solid stone rather than above it. Single fragmented slab, the Rosetta Stone, eventually unlocked the voices of the ancient world. For centuries, no one alive could read hieroglyphs. The language of ancient Egypt had gone completely silent. Then, in 1799, near the town of Rosetta, soldiers uncovered a block of black granite inscribed in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic, all repeating the same royal decree. Because scholars could still read Greek, they finally had a way to begin decoding the older scripts. It took decades of careful work, but eventually the silence broke. Temples, tombs, and scrolls came alive with meaning again. The Rosetta Stone didn't merely translate words. It gave voice back to a civilization long buried beneath its own symbols. Obelisks were carved as stone needles meant to pierce the sky and anchor divine light to the earth. Standing at temple entrances like frozen shafts of sunlight, obelisks were tall, narrow monuments carved from a single piece of stone. Their tips were often gilded to catch the very first light of dawn. Dedicated to the sun god Ra, they symbolized a cosmic link, earth reaching upward, light descending in return. Some weighed hundreds of tons and had to be transported across miles of desert terrain. Several still stand today far from home, in cities like Rome, Paris, and London. But each began as a sacred gesture, a monument not to conquest, but to light itself and the invisible thread connecting gods and sky. Most Egyptians lived in homes built from sun-dried mud, structures essentially designed to eventually dissolve back into the earth. While the pyramids were carved from enduring stone, ordinary Egyptian homes were made of something far more fragile: mud mixed with straw and shaped into bricks. This material was cheap, plentiful, and easy to build with. It kept interiors cool during the day and retained warmth through cold desert nights. But it wasn't built to last. Wind, flooding, and time gradually reduced these homes to dust, erasing entire towns. There's something almost poetic in that, ordinary homes returning to the very soil that formed them, while the tombs of the dead endured for millennia. In Egypt, permanence belonged to the afterlife. Daily life stayed in constant motion. The Nile's annual floods created one of the most fertile stretches of land on the planet. Each year the river swelled, a dark tide sweeping across its banks before soaking into the waiting earth. When the waters receded, they left behind fine, nutrient-rich black silt. This natural fertilizer turned Egypt into a thin green corridor, cutting through endless desert. Wheat, flax, barley, figs, and papyrus all thrived in that dark, mineral-rich soil, sparing Egyptians the need for complicated irrigation systems or constant crop rotation. The river simply provided, feeding people, livestock, and gods alike. They personified it as Hapi, a generous, life-giving deity. Without the annual flood, Egypt as we know it simply wouldn't have existed. With it came genuine abundance. Ancient Egyptian bread was often gritty with sand, which gradually wore down people's teeth over a lifetime. Bread served as Egypt's everyday staple, made from emmer wheat ground using stone tools and baked in open ovens. Unfortunately, that grinding process left behind tiny particles of grit that worked their way into the finished loaves. Over years of eating, these abrasive fragments wore down tooth enamel, sometimes all the way to the root. Mummies from every social class show evidence of cracked, flattened teeth and painful abscesses, even among pharaohs. For all its agricultural richness, Egyptian cuisine carried this hidden cost. A slow, steady erosion endured largely in silence, eased only by wine, beer, or quiet prayer. Egyptian perfume recipes were prized enough to be guarded like royal secrets. The air throughout ancient Egypt carried, sent everywhere sacred incense drifting through temples, fragrant oils used in homes, elaborate perfumes worn by the elite. Perfume wasn't purely about beauty. It doubled as medicine, ritual, and personal identity. Blends of myrrh, cinnamon, lily, and balsam were steeped in oil and aged much like fine wine, some formulas taking weeks or even years to prepare. Certain temples maintained their own signature scents, reserved strictly for ceremonial use. Royal recipes were sometimes considered so valuable that they were deliberately hidden or even destroyed to keep them exclusive. Today, researchers have managed to recreate some of these ancient fragrances, letting a faint whisper from across the centuries linger once more. Magic wasn't dismissed as superstition. It functioned as a legitimate part of formal medicine and healing. In ancient Egypt, there was no strict divide between science and magic. A physician might prescribe herbs alongside a protective spell. A priest might chant over an ill patient while also applying salves and oils. Healing was understood as layered and complex because the world itself was believed to be full of forces, both visible and hidden. Demons could cause sickness, unseen spirits could block breathing. Protective incantations were inscribed on amulets, recited during childbirth, and painted across tomb walls. Far from irrational, this fusion of belief and medical practice was carefully documented and formally taught. One of the many ways Egypt maintained balance between the realms of life and death. Scribes held such prestige that many were buried with their writing tools. Becoming a scribe in ancient Egypt meant holding real influence over language, law, and legacy. These weren't simple record keepers. They were experts in sacred symbols, trusted by both kings and priests. In a culture where writing itself was seen as divine, the scribes stood as a bridge between mortals and gods. They tracked offerings, measured harvests, composed hymns, and recorded funerary spells. Their expertise brought status, security, and sometimes a shot at literal immortality. Many were buried alongside their writing kits. Ink palettes, red pens, rolled scrolls, tools meant for use in the next life as much as this one. A soul who could still write, after all, could remember its own name and write itself back into existence. The reed pen served as far more than a writing tool. It functioned as a sacred link to Thoth, god of writing. Egyptian scribes didn't rely on quills or brushes. They wrote using simple reed pens sharpened to a fine point, dipped in ink made from soot or ochre, and drawn carefully across papyrus. But these tools carried deeper meaning. Every stroke functioned almost as ritual, every glyph a small breath of the divine. Thoth, frequently shown with the head of an ibis, was credited with inventing writing itself. Every mark made with a reed pen echoed that original divine act shaping order out of chaos, memory out of silence. To write was, in a sense, to invoke Thoth directly, and holding a pen meant holding a sliver of sacred power. Music served as a form of worship, echoing through Egyptian temple halls rather than functioning as mere entertainment. In Egyptian temples, music elevated rather than simply entertained. Flutes, harps, tambourines, and sistrums, rattles sacred to the goddess Hathor, filled temple air with rhythm and reverence. Musicians accompanied sacred rituals, processions, and offerings, and the resulting vibrations were believed to please the gods, stir divine presence, and help maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order. Even household shrines featured music, meant to soothe the soul, invite protection, and mark life's ongoing cycles. Hieroglyphs depict rows of women shaking sistrums, not performers for an audience, but priestesses playing for the unseen, for whatever lay just behind the visible veil of the world. Every household kept a personal shrine, allowing families to communicate directly with their own protective deities. Religion in ancient Egypt wasn't confined strictly to temples. It wove through everyday domestic life. Most families maintained a small shrine, a simple niche, a painted box, a carved stone tucked into a wall, where offerings were made and prayers whispered. These household gods felt close and personal, protective cobras, fertility spirits, guardian figures like Bes, or lioness mother goddesses like Tauret. They were believed to watch over childbirth, health, sleep, and general safety. Bread, beer, or flowers might be left as an offering at night, a candle lit in gratitude. In a world of grand temples and distant pharaohs, the home shrine offered something intimate, a quiet, personal reminder that the divine was never far away. The Eye of Horus Fu, and see beyond as more than decoration. It was worn as active protection against chaos. With its distinctive curved markings and sharp lines, the Eye of Horus ranks among ancient Egypt's most iconic symbols, and it carried genuine protective weight rooted in myth. According to legend, the eye was torn out during Horus's battle with Set, then magically restored. And that act of healing gave the symbol lasting power. It came to represent wholeness, clarity, and resilience against both physical and spiritual wounds. Amulets shaped like the eye were worn by the living and placed with the dead. Sailors painted it onto ships, mothers hung it above cradles, It wasn't treated as simple luck. It functioned as a shield, a spell rendered visually in the shape of sight itself. Pharaohs didn't merely rule from a distance. In wartime, they often led armies from the very front lines. We tend to imagine pharaohs as remote figures seated on thrones, weighed down with gold. But in battle, many rode at the head of their troops. Ramesses II charged directly into the chaos at Kadesh. Thutmose III led dozens of military campaigns with strategic skill that remains impressive by any standard. These kings weren't merely ceremonial figureheads. They were expected to command, backed by both divine right and personal courage. Victory affirmed the gods' favor. Defeat threatened to unravel the entire social order. So, beneath the crowns and formal titles, stood a warrior charging into dust, bow drawn, the fate of the entire kingdom riding with him. Some tomb ceilings were painted with stars, so the dead could rest eternally beneath a night sky of their own. Step into the tomb of a noble or pharaoh and look upward, and you might find thousands of stars painted in bright white against deep blue. This wasn't purely decorative. It functioned as a kind of portal. Egyptians believed the afterlife mirrored the heavens, with the soul traveling among the stars in the company of gods. A ceiling painted as a celestial canopy ensured the dead wouldn't feel trapped underground. Instead, they'd rest beneath open skies, bathed in starlight. Some ceilings even mapped actual constellations and lunar cycles, not just imagery to admire, but a chart to follow. A tomb, in this sense, functioned as a kind of vessel meant to carry the soul among the stars. Egypt's gold came from deep mines in the eastern desert, sites believed to be guarded by sacred texts and dangerous spirits. Egypt's gold supply didn't come from the Nile. It came from scorching mines carved into mountains far to the east, worked by laborers who understood both the danger and the devotion involved. Ancient inscriptions describe routes protected by gods and curses alike. Some texts invoke divine blessings for the miners, while others warn intruders to turn back or face spiritual retribution. Gold wasn't treated as mere wealth. It was thought of as the very flesh of the gods, sacred and eternal. Extracting it meant walking a line between fortune and blasphemy. The desert didn't surrender its treasure easily, but for those willing to brave it, the reward glittered like sunlight trapped inside stone. Internal organs weren't simply discarded during mummification. They were carefully stored in jars under divine protection. During the mummification process, the body had to be emptied out, but never disrespected. The lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines were removed, treated, and sealed inside canopic jars, each one adorned with the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus, divine guardians assigned to protect specific organs. The liver went to Imseti, the lungs to Hapi, the stomach to Dumudef, and the intestines to Kebe-Senuf. These jars sat near the body, often inside carved chests sealed with protective prayers. The heart, considered the seat of the soul, was typically left inside the body, or wrapped separately. The body may have been divided during preparation, but nothing sacred was ever lost. Everything remained under careful watch. Mummy wrappings frequently concealed dozens of hidden amulets, each serving its own specific purpose. The linen wrapped around a mummy wasn't just protective cloth. It functioned as layered magic. Hidden within the folds were amulets crafted from gold, faience, stone, or glass, each with a distinct role: an eye of Horus for healing, a scarab for rebirth, a jed pillar for stability, a knot of Isis for protection. These charms were placed at precise points on the body: throat, chest, fingers, following detailed ritual instructions. Ordinary mummies might carry a handful, royal ones carried hundreds. Together, the wrappings formed a kind of woven armor built from spells and symbols, a body shielded not only by cloth, but by layered meaning and quiet hope. No soul could rest until its heart had been weighed against a feather. In the Hall of Judgment, every Egyptian soul faced the same test. The god Anubis would place the deceased's heart, the seat of truth and memory, onto one side of a scale. On the other side sat a feather, specifically the feather of Mot, goddess of balance and cosmic order. If the heart weighed less than the feather, the soul could pass on into the afterlife. If it weighed more, it was devoured by the demon Ammit, and the soul simply ceased to exist. There was no punishment involved, no fiery torment, just complete erasure. The judgment wasn't really about a single crime. It was about overall harmony. Passing the test meant a life lived in balance, honest, light, and remembered with genuine affection. Sacred texts used 2 ink colors deliberately: black for standard text, red for spells and moments of danger. On Egyptian papyrus, color functioned as a kind of code rather than mere decoration. Most writing appeared in black ink made from carbon soot, but red ink flagged something significant: divine names, magical incantations, chapter headings, or outright warnings. Sometimes it introduced dangerous spirits or marked pivotal turning points within a spell. To the Egyptians, red represented energy, vitality, and risk simultaneously, tied to both life force and chaos. Reading these dual-toned texts felt like walking a line between worlds. The Book of the Dead, threaded through with these color-coded passages, wasn't merely read. It was followed like a map, the ink itself signaling what was sacred and what was perilous. The cobra and vulture featured on the pharaoh's crown weren't purely decorative. They represented active protective forces. The royal crown carried more than symbolic weight. It functioned almost as a living invocation. Positioned at its front were 2 creatures, poised and alert: a cobra and a vulture. The cobra, known as the Uraeus, represented the goddess Wadjet, guardian of Lower Egypt. The vulture stood for Nekhbit, protector of Upper Egypt. Together, they united divine authority with actual geography, but they weren't simply emblems of unity. They were considered magical sentinels. The cobra was said to spit fire at threats. The vulture spread invisible protective wings. Every time a pharaoh wore this crown, he wasn't merely displaying royal status. he was actively calling down guardians armed with fangs and feathers, watching from his brow. Some temples were carved directly into cliffs and precisely lit so the gods inside would seem to awaken with the sunrise. Not every temple rose from freestanding stone. Some were hewn straight into rock. Abu Simbel, perhaps the most famous example, was carved into a sandstone cliff face under Ramesses II. Its massive statues gaze out toward the Nile, but the real marvel lies inside. The temple's inner sanctuary was aligned so that twice each year, near the king's birthday and coronation day, sunlight would travel deep into the structure, illuminating statues of the gods and of Ramesses himself. This wasn't coincidental. It was cosmic architecture, deliberately etched in stone. The gods weren't just given a home. They were engineered to be awakened by light itself. Colossal statues functioned as guardians, standing between the world of humans and the realm of the gods. Towering above temple gates, lining grand avenues, flanking royal thrones, Egypt's massive statues are unforgettable. But they weren't built purely to impress. They served as watchers, guardians, and sacred vessels meant to hold divine presence. A statue of a pharaoh didn't just depict him. It became a vessel for his Ka, his spiritual essence. The same principle applied to statues of gods. Rituals were performed to invite the spirit into the stone, complete with offerings and burning incense, after which the statue was believed to see, hear, and respond. Even after death, a king could receive tribute through his statue. These weren't inert monuments. They were regarded as awake, silent, watchful, and powerful. Ancient graffiti still survives inside tombs, messages left behind by workers, pilgrims, and the occasional prankster. Amid all the sacred texts and formal prayers carved into Egypt's tombs, you'll occasionally stumble across something unexpected: graffiti. Not vandalism in the modern sense, but genuine messages left by ordinary people. Workers etched their own names into stones they had personally placed. Pilgrims scribbled blessings or brief dedications. One inscription simply reads, "I was here with my friend." Another names a beloved dog. Some graffiti is playful, even a little rebellious. It's a reminder that Egypt wasn't purely a realm of priests and kings. It was full of ordinary people with sharp tools and something to say, their voices still faintly audible across the centuries. The desert could naturally mummify a body, preserving it for thousands of years without any deliberate ritual involved. Long before embalming developed into a refined art, nature handled the job on its own. In Egypt's dry, sandy desert, bodies buried in shallow graves dehydrated quickly, halting decay and serving skin, hair, and even fingerprints. These accidental mummies came first, untouched by priestly ritual, but astonishingly well. Some are more than 5,000 years old and still show signs of the life once lived: tattoos, clothing fragments, jewelry. It's likely this natural preservation directly inspired Egyptians to later develop intentional mummification techniques. The desert had already taught them that a body, given the right conditions, could last almost indefinitely, needing only silence, sand, and time. A single sacred beetle, the dung-rolling scarab, was believed to physically push the sun across the sky each day. To the ancient Egyptians, the humble scarab beetle carried far more weight than its size suggested. It symbolized rebirth. Watching the insect roll balls of dung across the ground, they saw a cosmic parallel. The sun god Khepri rolling the sun through the heavens every morning. The beetle became a sacred emblem of daily renewal, transformation, and resurrection. Scarab amulets were carved by the thousands, buried alongside the dead, stamped into official seals, and worn for protection. In a world full of crocodiles and falcons, it was ultimately a beetle that quietly, persistently moved the heavens each day. The lotus flower carried deep symbolic weight, blooming from mud. It came to represent rebirth itself. In Egypt's still waters, something quietly remarkable happened each morning. The lotus rose from dark, muddy depths, opening its pale petals to greet the sun. As light faded, it closed and sank back beneath the surface, only to rise again the next day. To the ancient Egyptians, this cycle wasn't just botanical. It was a message, a symbol of the soul's daily return from darkness. The lotus became closely associated with creation, resurrection, and divine renewal. Gods were often depicted seated on lotus thrones. The dead were buried with lotus garlands, a flower rising from mud, reaching steadily toward the sky. Some gods were worshipped only within a single town, and their names vanished entirely once that town disappeared. Not every Egyptian deity achieved widespread fame. Some remained strictly local, known only within a single village, their temples modest, but no less sacred. These minor gods guarded wells, fields, or marketplaces, protectors tied to one specific place. When a town fell into ruin, its local god often vanished right along with it, never recorded in the grander national myths, never preserved in monumental carvings. Once, though, these gods were very real, whispered to by candlelight, called upon during childbirth, honored with songs now permanently lost. Archaeologists occasionally uncover statues bearing unfamiliar names, gods with no surviving stories, faint echoes of faith that flickered briefly and then faded. The world's oldest known woven garment was discovered in an Egyptian tomb, dating back nearly 5,000 years. Hidden within a grave near the Nile, archaeologists uncovered a different kind of treasure, not gold, but fabric. Known as the Tarkan dress, it stands as the oldest known woven garment in the world, made of linen, and dated to roughly 3,480 BCE. It still shows finely pleated sleeves and a carefully tailored shape, clear evidence of sophisticated craftsmanship and personal style, existing long before written history even began. The dress was modest but elegant, buried not as a display of wealth, but likely as a cherished personal keepsake. Across 5 millennia, Somehow, it survived, folded quietly in darkness, waiting to be rediscovered. Priests carefully watched the stars to know exactly when to plant crops, hold ceremonies, and communicate with the dead. Egyptian priests functioned as skilled astronomers as much as religious leaders. They tracked the rising and setting of stars to mark life's essential rhythms. The star Sirius signaled the Nile's annual flood, the moment fields would flourish again. Other constellations guided sacred festivals, temple ceremonies, and even the timing for opening certain tombs. Watching the sky wasn't treated as science or superstition alone. It functioned as genuine communion. The stars were understood as gods, the sky itself as sacred text, and reading its patterns allowed priests to synchronize earthly life with eternity, bringing harvest, healing, and harmony between the world above and the world below. Mirrors crafted from polished bronze were used in rituals meant to reflect a person's soul. Before glass mirrors existed, Egyptians gazed at their own reflections in polished bronze, shining almost like liquid light, often round in shape, sometimes finely engraved, and always handled with care. But these mirrors weren't purely about vanity. They were believed to reflect the Ka, a person's spiritual essence, and were used in funerary rites, magical practices, and beauty rituals alike. Some were buried with the dead, meant to help a soul recognize itself in the afterlife. In myth, the goddess Hathor gazed into a mirror to restore her divine appearance, proof that even a simple tool could reveal something beyond tea. The physical body. Nile crocodiles inspired both fear and reverence. Some were kept in temple pools and worshipped as gods. Living near the Nile meant living near crocodiles, silent, sudden, and lethal. Yet Egyptians didn't simply fear them, they worshipped them. The crocodile god Sobek represented strength, fertility, and protection all at once. In certain towns, live crocodiles were kept in dedicated temple pools, decorated with jewelry, and fed regularly by priests. When they died, they were mummified with real reverence, wrapped, treated, and placed in sacred tombs. Honoring the predator was, in a sense, a way of taming it, folding its ferocity into a larger sense of order. Sobek embodied both danger and protection at once, a god lurking in still water, sharp-toothed and sacred. Egyptian gods could merge together, forming entirely new deities that combined their individual powers and forms. In ancient Egypt, divinity wasn't fixed or rigid. Gods could blend, two distinct beings merging into a single form without erasing either one, instead amplifying both. Amun, the hidden wind, merged with Ra, the radiant sun, to become king of the gods. Ta-Sak or Osiris fused the roles of creator, guardian, and lord of the dead into one figure. These combinations weren't seen as contradictions. They represented layered complexity, much like colors blending on a sacred palette. When gods merged, they became simultaneously more mysterious and more complete. In Egypt, truth rarely stayed singular. It shifted, shimmered, and wore many faces at once. Some tombs bore inscribed curses meant to frighten off potential thieves, And whether or not the magic was real, the psychology often worked. Cursed be he who disturbs this tomb, some inscriptions warned. May his limbs tremble and his soul never find rest. These weren't idle threats. Tomb robbery was a genuine, persistent danger, so builders sometimes added dire warnings, invoking gods, plagues, madness, or divine punishment. Was the magic real? Possibly. Was the psychological effect real? Absolutely. Even centuries later, when archaeologists opened long-sealed chambers, stories of mysterious deaths and strange coincidences persisted. Whether or not the curses held any true power, the idea alone was often enough to make even the boldest thief pause. Beloved pets, cats, dogs, monkeys, even gazelles, were sometimes mummified and buried alongside their owners. Animals in ancient Egypt weren't viewed merely as pets. They were family, companions, and occasionally sacred symbols. Cats protected the home and were closely tied to Bastet. Dogs guarded both house and tomb. Some families cared for their animals so deeply that they buried them in small coffins right beside their owners, fully mummified with genuine care. In one tomb, archaeologists found a monkey still wearing its collar. In another, a gazelle rested peacefully beside its owner. Death didn't necessarily mean separation. For some Egyptians, eternity felt a little more like home, with a loyal companion nearby. Boats held sacred status. They were believed to ferry the dead through the underworld and the sun across the sky. The Nile gave Egypt life and shaped its entire spiritual outlook, and boats functioned as more than practical transportation. They were treated as divine vehicles. According to myth, the sun god Ra traveled across the sky by boat during the day, then journeyed through the underworld by night, battling darkness before rising once more at dawn. In funerary belief, the dead also required a boat to reach the afterlife. Model boats were regularly buried in tombs. Full-sized vessels were sometimes sealed directly beside pyramids. The journey into the next world wasn't imagined as a walk, it was a voyage. The river had taught them that lesson clearly. A body traveling the Nile, a soul making its own similar passage. Egyptian ships sailed far down the Red Sea, trading with lands whose exact locations remain uncertain even today. Egypt was hardly isolated. Its vessels ventured deep into the Red Sea toward the land of Punt, sometimes called God's land, rich in incense, gold, ebony, and exotic animals. Pharaohs like Hatshepsut dispatched entire fleets there, returning laden with treasures and stories. But where exactly was Punt located? Somewhere near modern Somalia, Yemen, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, lost beneath shifting desert or sea? We still aren't certain. The exact trade routes were kept deliberately secret, wrapped in myth and mystery. Temple wall carvings, however, depict long boats, unfamiliar creatures, and foreign faces, proof that Egypt looked outward, always trading and exploring lands the modern world has yet to fully rediscover. Entire temples were disassembled and physically relocated to save them from rising floodwaters. Back in the 1960s, a genuine feat of modern engineering unfolded. As Egypt constructed the Aswan High Dam, rising waters from the newly formed lake, Nasser threatened to submerge ancient sites, including the magnificent temples of Abu Simbel. The international community responded. Teams of archaeologists and engineers carefully cut the temples into manageable blocks, hauled them uphill, and reassembled them with painstaking precision, preserving their original solar alignments in the process. It stands as one of history's largest heritage rescue efforts, a remarkable blend of reverence and technical skill, spanning multiple nations and years of work. The temples still stand today, not quite in their original location, but still facing the dawn exactly as they always have. Mummification took a full 70 days, with each stage accompanied by its own spell or ceremony. Preserving a body in ancient Egypt was never a quick process. It took 70 days total, filled with drying, wrapping, and sacred recitation at every stage. The process began with purification, the body washed in palm wine and Nile water. Next came the removal of internal organs, careful drying using natron salt, and anointing with oils and resins. Wrapping alone took weeks, and each layer of linen might be accompanied by its own spell, amulet, or whispered name meant to preserve remembrance. Embalmers weren't merely technicians. They were ritual specialists guiding the soul through a profound transformation. Mummification, in the end, wasn't simply preservation. It was rebirth carried out in sacred time. Some pharaohs were deliberately erased, their names chiseled off every monument bearing their image. In Egypt, losing your name effectively meant losing your soul. The punishment known as damnatio memoriae, the deliberate erasure of a ruler's identity, carried enormous weight. Hatshepsut, a powerful female pharaoh, was nearly wiped from history entirely. Akhenaten, the heretic king who insisted on worshiping a single god, had his name and temples defaced after death. Chisels scratched names directly from stone. Statues had their faces broken or recarved for later rulers. This wasn't purely political retaliation. It functioned as a kind of spiritual warfare. Erasing a name meant stripping away its place in eternity. And yet, remarkably, many of these erased figures still manage to speak to us today. The jackal-headed god Anubis guarded cemeteries and greeted souls at the threshold of death. Dark and largely silent, Anubis occupied the boundary between the living and the dead. With the head of a jackal, a scavenger commonly found near graveyards, he became the guardian of tombs, the overseer of embalming, and the very first guide into the afterlife. In earlier myth, Anubis himself weighed the heart of the deceased against the feather of truth. He wrapped bodies in linen, watched over the necropolis, and ensured every soul found its proper path. His presence carried solemnity, but never cruelty. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't purely terrifying, it was a transition, and Anubis was there to walk beside them through it. Tomb carvings weren't originally bare stone. They were once painted in vivid, saturated color. Walking through an Egyptian tomb today, the carvings often appear soft and pale, faded by time. But when freshly carved, those scenes blazed with color. Deep blues and reds, rich ochres, vivid greens. Gods were painted in radiant gold. Farmers walked through fields of emerald green barley. The sky was rendered with stars. The Nile depicted in lapis blue with painted fish. Paint wasn't merely decorative. It gave life to stone. In a few places, flecks of original color still cling to the walls, quietly hinting at how vibrant these chambers once felt. To carve was to shape the body. To paint was to give it a soul. Hatshepsut commissioned a temple, so striking it was carved directly into the living rock of a cliff face. Pharaoh Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt outright, left behind a genuine masterpiece, Der el-Bahari. Her mortuary temple rises from the desert floor in symmetrical terraces that seem to hug the surrounding cliffs, almost like a natural extension of the mountain itself. It was designed not just for visual beauty, but to mirror the natural world, blending stone with sunlight and earth with sky. Inside, colonnades depict scenes from her claimed divine birth and her celebrated trading expeditions to distant lands. The temple functioned as more than a place of worship. It was a legacy quite literally carved into the bones of the earth. A woman's voice made permanent. Ancient Egyptian. Jewelry frequently combined gold with colored glass to imitate the traditional colors associated with the gods. Jewelry in ancient Egypt served purposes well beyond simple adornment. It offered protection, symbolic meaning, and beauty all at once, crafted with genuine precision. Gold was prized not only for its material value, but because it symbolized eternity, thought of as the very skin of the gods. Even more modest pieces shimmered with intentional call, or artisans combined gold with faience, a type of glazed ceramic, and with colored glass designed to imitate lapis, lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian, materials strongly associated with divine power. Each color carried its own message: blue for the heavens, red for vitality, green for life. Jewelry, in this context, functioned as magic you could actually wear. Statues were formally awakened through ritual, allowing a deity's spirit to inhabit the stone itself. To the ancient Egyptians, a statue was never treated as a mere image. It could genuinely come alive. Through a sacred ceremony known as the opening of the mouth, priests would symbolically activate the statue's senses: eyes to see, ears to hear, a mouth to breathe and speak. Incense swirled, chants rose, and the spirit of the god was formally invited to inhabit the stone. From that point on, the statue functioned as more than a symbol. It embodied the actual presence of the deity. Offerings were placed before it, secrets whispered to it, and once the ritual concluded, the god was believed to be genuinely present, silently listening. Thoth, depicted with an ibis head, was credited with inventing writing, timekeeping, and the fundamental laws governing the universe. With an ibis's head and destiny's scroll in hand, Thoth served as the architect of cosmic order. He was said to have invented writing so the deeds of both gods and mortals could be properly remembered. He measured the heavens and gave Egypt its calendar. He even settled disputes among the gods, weighing truth with complete impartiality. In myth, Thoth recorded the outcome of every soul's final judgment, inscribing each fate carefully. He wasn't imagined as a warrior or builder. He was the voice of logic, reason, and memory. Every scroll, every formula, every line of hieroglyphic text was, in some sense, a whisper originating from Thoth himself. The crook and flail weren't purely symbolic ornaments. Together, they represented the pharaoh's dual duty to protect and to discipline. Held crossed over the chest in countless statues and coffin lids, the crook and flail are instantly recognizable, but they carried very specific meaning. The crook, a shepherd's tool, signified the pharaoh's responsibility to guide and protect his people. The flail, originally used for thrashing grain, also represented the authority to discipline when necessary. Together, they embodied balance. Every ruler expected to combine kindness with command, mercy with strength. These weren't weapons, they were reminders. The pharaoh functioned simultaneously as a shepherd carrying a staff and a god wielding a lash. Some pyramids collapsed partway through construction, their mistakes eventually buried beneath entirely new structures. Not every pyramid succeeded on the first attempt. One of the earliest, the Maiden Pyramid, partially collapsed, leaving behind a strange, stepped ruin. The famous Bent Pyramid began cracking midway through construction, forcing builders to abruptly change its angle partway up. Even highly skilled ancient engineers made serious miscalculations, sometimes driven by haste, poor quality stone, or ambition, simply outpacing available technology. But rather than abandon these projects entirely, builders adjusted course, sometimes constructing right over the earlier broken remains. Egypt's monuments weren't born flawless. They were shaped gradually through risk, failure, and an unshakable determination to reach toward the sky. The red land represented desert chaos. The black land represented the life-sustaining strip beside the Nile. For the Egyptians, the physical landscape itself carried deep spiritual meaning. The black land, or Kemet, was the fertile Nile-side strip, dark with rich silt, alive with crops and people. Beyond it stretched the red land, or Deseret, a realm of scorching sun, dry rock, and chaos. The desert wasn't simply empty wilderness. It was understood as the domain of Set, god of disorder and storms. Yet, Egyptian civilization thrived precisely because of the tension between these two forces, balancing life against danger, harvest against hunger. Civilization took root in that narrow space where order managed to hold the line against surrounding chaos. Egypt was conquered repeatedly across the centuries, yet its culture consistently bent without fully breaking. Persians, Greeks, Romans, and later Arab conquerors all took their turn ruling Egypt across the centuries. Yet unlike many fallen civilizations, its cultural identity endured. New rulers frequently adopted Egyptian customs, restored temples and sought to claim traditional pharaonic titles for themselves. The gods were sometimes renamed, but continued to be worshipped. Artistic styles shifted gradually rather than suddenly. Even under Roman rule, hieroglyphs continued to be carved and mummies buried in traditional fashion. Egypt absorbed successive waves of invaders, much like the Nile absorbs its own banks, slow, steadily, without losing its essential character. It wasn't defiance exactly, it was continuity. Through it all, the pyramids simply watched, unmoved. Egypt didn't collapse. It kept flowing. Even the humblest graves usually contained protective amulets, because no soul was meant to face the afterlife unguarded. Not everyone could afford an elaborate tomb or towering pyramid. Most Egyptians were buried in simple pits or modest chapels. Yet even in these unassuming resting places, you'll frequently find small amulets made of faience or stone, shaped like scarabs, eyes, ankhs, or minor deities. These were tucked into wrappings, placed on chests, or slipped beneath arms, not merely for comfort, but as solidified spells meant to guide, protect, and empower the soul on its journey ahead. Rich or poor, remembered or forgotten, no one was meant to enter the next world completely alone. Every soul, it seems, deserved at least a little magic. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in 394 CE, shortly before the old temples fell permanently silent. Somewhere within the Temple of Philae, a priest picked up his chisel one final time, carving a line of hieroglyphs invoking a ritual in the sacred language of the gods. That was 394 CE. Soon after, the temple was shuttered by official decree, and the ancient script fell silent, unread, unwritten, gradually forgotten. For more than 3,000 years, hieroglyphs had recorded births, battles, prayers, and poetry. Then they vanished entirely, until the Rosetta Stone finally cracked the code centuries later. That final inscription at Philae wasn't simply a piece of text. It was the last breath of an ancient world, etched into stone just before the light went out. The Great Pyramid once gleamed brilliant white, covered entirely in polished limestone casing stones. Today, the Great Pyramid of Giza rises in weathered golden brown stone, worn smooth by centuries of wind. But when it was first completed, it looked completely different. Its surface was sheathed in smooth white Tura limestone, polished to a brilliant gleam that reflected sunlight like a beacon. It must have shimmered against the sky, a literal mountain of light dazzling across the desert landscape. Some ancient writers even claimed it could be seen from miles away. Over the centuries, most of that casing stone was stripped away and repurposed for later construction projects. But for a very long stretch of history, the Great Pyramid wasn't just impressively tall. It genuinely shone like a star fixed to the earth. Some gods carried dozens of names, faces, and forms, yet were always understood as a single underlying presence. In ancient Egypt, a single deity might appear as a lion, a falcon, the sun, a sound, or even a particular color, depending depending on context. Gods like Ra accumulated dozens of names, each reflecting a distinct role: Ra Horekti, Amun-Ra, Ra of the horizon. Isis could be understood as a mother, a throne, the sky, or even a hidden, secret word. This wasn't viewed as confusing. It represented depth. Egyptians didn't envision a single fixed face for the divine. They embraced many faces united by one essence. To speak a god's name was to summon just one facet of a larger mystery. And the more names a deity accumulated, the more fully real that deity seemed to become. Temples were filled with the scent of incense and the sound of chanting, creating an immersive sensory environment for the divine. Egyptian temples were never quiet stone halls. They were alive with ritual, color, scent, and sound. Priests chanted hymns in steady rhythm. Incense made from frankincense, myrrh, and kyphi filled the air with sweetness and smoke. Walls were painted in vivid reds and blues, and offerings of bread, flowers, and wine were arranged almost like art. Each temple functioned as a miniature cosmos, deliberately designed to attract and house the gods, appealing to every sense as a signal of genuine reverence. Walking through one meant stepping into a kind of holy performance, staged not just for human visitors, but for unseen audiences as well. The gods, it was believed, responded to beauty. Many Egyptian myths were never actually written down. They were passed along orally, whispered from one generation to the next. Despite the sheer volume of surviving inscriptions, papyri, and temple carvings, plenty of Egypt's stories were never formally recorded. They survived instead in the voices of storytellers, passed from mother to child, priest to novice, worker to worker. Some myths exist today only as fragments, hints, echoes, names without accompanying tales, symbols stripped of their original context. Entire belief systems may have vanished the moment their last living storyteller fell silent. And yet, these stories still shaped the world all the same. Egypt's memory was never purely stone and scroll. Some of it was breath, warm, fleeting, and gone like smoke carried off by desert wind. Greek and Roman religious traditions absorbed Egyptian gods and carried them westward across the centuries. When Greek and Roman powers arrived in Egypt, they didn't destroy its gods, they adopted them instead. Isis became an empire-wide goddess, worshipped from Spain to Syria. Serapis, a deliberate blend of Osiris and various Greek deities, was created specifically to bridge the two cultures. Statues of Horus appeared in Roman villas far from the Nile. Egyptian symbols, ankhs, scarabs, the Eye of Horus, turned up in jewelry, mosaics, and temples across the wider Mediterranean world. The gods changed names, adopted new forms, and kept traveling regardless. Long after the pharaohs faded from power, Egyptian mythology continued pulsing quietly through Western belief systems. The river of myth had simply changed course, without ever stopping entirely. Some tombs remained hidden for thousands of years, completely undisturbed beneath shifting desert sand. Not every tomb fell victim to looters. Some were simply forgotten, buried by sandstorms, built over by later cities, or hidden so deeply that no one even realized they existed. These sealed chambers stayed untouched for millennia, preserving treasures, scrolls, and bodies still wrapped in linen. When eventually discovered, they brought the ancient past back to vivid life. Tutankhamun's tomb, uncovered in 1922, had lain hidden for well over 3,000 years. Other tombs are still being unearthed today, bearing names we've never encountered and honoring gods we barely recognize. In Egypt, memory can quite literally sleep beneath your feet, waiting patiently until the wind eventually shifts. Much of what we actually know about daily Egyptian life comes not from grand monuments, but from small fragments, shopping lists, love letters, laundry notes. The pyramids reveal what Egypt built, but scraps of surviving papyrus reveal how Egyptians actually lived. A mother's note urging her son to behave, a priest's laundry list, a protective spell scratched onto the back of a broken pot, love poems tucked away inside tombs. These modest, deeply personal relics were never intended to last, yet somehow survived by pure chance. They reveal voices belonging not to kings or gods, but to ordinary people, tired, tender, curious, imperfect, the everyday pulse of an ancient world. Egypt wasn't only golden tombs and towering monuments. It was also messy homes, budding romances, daily chores, and dreams scrawled in fading ink. Even today, new Egyptian ruins continue to surface, revealing entire cities that have slept beneath the soil for centuries. Every year, the desert reveals a few more of its secrets. Beneath shifting sand, within shadowed cliffs, and under the silt of long-vanished waterways lie entire buried cities. Some are known only through faint textual references. Others emerge suddenly when modern construction crews dig too deep. Tombs with painted walls, workshops still filled with ancient tools, statues standing exactly where priests once walked centuries ago. Egypt's story is far from finished. It continues to unfold, continues to speak. Archaeologists today still uncover wonders capable of astonishing visitors just as much as they would have 4,000 years ago. The past isn't truly buried. It's simply waiting. The story of ancient Egypt never really ended. It simply became part of humanity's shared imagination. Though its temples eventually fell silent and its gods faded gradually into myth, Egypt never fully disappeared. It lived on through scrolls, legends, distant cathedrals, and modern cities alike. The pyramids became lasting symbols. The Nile became a powerful metaphor. Its gods walked directly into our languages, our dreams, our understanding of the night sky. Children still learn their names today. Artists still paint their faces. And for as long as someone wonders what lies buried beneath desert sand, or looks up at a sky once studied by a scribe holding an inked reed pen, Egypt continues to live on, not merely in memory, but in imagination itself. And now, let the echoes of Egypt slowly fade into stillness. The golden temples, the whispering tombs, the gods wearing countless faces, all of it dissolving gently, like sand slipping through fingers, soft and silent beneath the stars. You've wandered tonight through a world built from memory, where the sky itself told stories, and the Nile flowed not only through fields, but through the hearts of a people who dreamed of eternity. Perhaps you'll carry a small piece of it with you into sleep tonight, the gleam of a pyramid under moonlight, a scarab quietly pushing the sun across the sky, or a name whispered into the desert wind, still patiently waiting to be remembered. Here, in this quiet space between waking and dreaming, you're really not so far from those ancient souls. You're resting beneath the very same stars. You're breathing the very same mystery. So close your eyes now. Let the gods stand watch at the gates of your rest. Let these stories settle gently around you, like soft linen, sacred and carefully woven. If you happen to still be awake, here's a gentle reminder to like this video and subscribe to Historical Narratives for more stories just like this one. And if you're still feeling curious, feel free to check out the next video on your screen. But if you're ready to drift off now, then may your dreams run long and full of wonder.